This is the Crimson Corner with Bill Riley.
Walks it into the end zone for a Utah touchdown.
Your source for the best insight on everything happening in and around Utah athletics. Now, here's the host of the Crimson Corner, the voice of the Utes, Bill Riley.
Welcome in to the latest edition of the Crimson Corner podcast. I'm Bill Riley, the play-by-play voice of the University of Utah and your host of the Crimson Corner. We are sitting here in late February. How are we almost 2 months gone in 2026? I have no idea. The basketball season is almost done, too. We've got a couple of more weeks of Utah basketball. Now, maybe, just maybe, well, maybe more than that, maybe a miracle run in Kansas City for the men or possibly the women, but yeah, it's weird to think we're almost 2 months into 2026. Glad you guys are with us on this week's edition of the Crimson Corner podcast, presented as always by our friends at Advanced Window Products. That's Nate Orchard's company, you know, the mayor of Sac Lake City. If you need windows for your house, for your business, for whatever it might be, whether replacement windows or brand new windows for a new build, let Advanced Window Products take good care of you. Got a really fun show coming up on this week's episode of Crimson Corner. We're going to talk Utah football with spring football right around the corner. We're going to go with a position group highlight. I'm going to do this kind of all the way through spring. This week, we're going to highlight the wide receiver group, a very important group, a group that, frankly, at Utah over the years probably hasn't been as big a highlight as it could be, and I think they're going to change that this year. So we'll talk a little bit about that and maybe where Utah sits. We're going to kind of look at some way too early top 25s that different people put out throughout the spring, and this week we're going to focus on one that's got Utah maybe a little bit higher than some of the others have. Also, men's basketball stretch run. Playing harder on the defensive end as of late. They've got Arizona State coming up on Saturday. Are they finding some building blocks for next year? Our special guest on the pod today will kind of fill us in on his job as well. He's the general manager of Utah basketball. He's been on the job now for not quite a year, probably about 10 months now. Wes Wilcox is going to stop by. We'll talk to him about year one and how the plan is beginning to kind of develop for year number two. We'll get to some reader emails. Yes, you guys are starting to send in some questions and comments on reader email, so we'll get to a couple of those today. As always, if you would like to comment on the pod, shoot a question to me about something we've talked about, give me a suggestion for a guest, whatever it might happen to be, shoot me an email, briley@huntsman.utah.edu. That's briley@huntsman.utah.edu. And if we've got some good questions or comments, like we do today, we'll share some of those and read some of those, but Nick Bowlerjack, my producer, and I would love to hear from you guys on the podcast as well here on Crimson Corner. So, without further ado, let's get rolling today. We'll start with Utah football. Spring football practice is right around the corner. It's going to start sometime probably mid-March. Practice, it's just practice. We all get excited because it's football. But as I say, you never get too excited about preseason football. You just don't do it because nothing is determined in the spring. But there's a new energy and a new vibe around Utah football this year with Morgan Scalley and a new staff and some new players and personnel. So it's okay to get a little excited about things. We'll talk spring football once practice begins and get some guests on for you as well. As I mentioned, we're going to take a look at position groups, and we'll do that coming up in a minute. But I thought we'd take a look at a way too early top 25. All the major publications, anybody that's got a keyboard, including yours truly, sometimes like to do these way too early top 25s. It's all guesswork, but it's guesswork with a little bit of education. You know what the rosters mostly look like. Nobody's roster at this point in time is changing a great deal. You've had the big winter portal. You've had your recruiting class come in. Your staff is mostly set. So there's not going to be a lot of roster change. There'll be some subtle tweaks and changes. A few guys added here and there. A few guys that might leave still after spring football. But what your roster is now as we approach March, as spring football begins, is pretty much what your roster is going to look like into fall camp and then into the season. So this week's look at a way too early top 25 centers on CBS Sports. And CBS Sports has 4 Big 12 teams in their preseason way too early top 25. They've got Texas Tech at number 7. No real surprise there, though I do think that's a little high for Texas Tech. I've said this before on this pod. I think Texas Tech is going to slide maybe back a little. They're not going to fall out of the top 25, but I don't know that they're going to be on paper right now as good as they were a year ago. I just don't. They had some really, really, really good players on that team, especially on the defensive side of the football. Those guys are going to the NFL now. Guys like David Bailey and Romello Height and Lee Hunter and Skylar Hill Howard and Jacob Rodriguez. Those guys are all gone. Now, maybe they'll get out the bank book and the checkbook and spend big like they did last year, but I'm not sure. I think 7 feels high for me. The second Big 12 team that CBS has in their way too early top 25 is BYU. They've got BYU at about number 12. And as I've said, I think BYU is going to be good again this year. I'm not sure they're number 12 good, but that's about in that right area for BYU. That brings us to the third team that they've got in their preseason top 25. That would be the University of Utah. They have Utah at number 18 in their preseason top 25. And to be very fair, that feels like a pretty good spot for Utah when you consider the offseason changes, a little bit of loss on the roster, but some games as well. But that feels about right. Remember, Utah finished at about 14 last year after an 11-2 season. I think 18 in the preseason is not a bad place to be. That's respect for the program, but it's also, hey, you guys have some offseason changes. Let's see what you do with that. The fourth preseason Big 12 team in the CBS Sports top 25 is Houston. Utah gets Houston at home this year. They get BYU at home this year as well, and they miss Texas Tech, which I think is a big deal in the regular season. They also miss ASU. ASU didn't make the preseason, way too early top 25 for CBS, but Houston's good. We saw that 2 years ago when Utah, albeit with some offensive struggles, went down there. Willie Fritz is their head coach. Willie Fritz will be entering his third season. Willie Fritz is a really good football coach. He did some nice things at Tulane before taking the Houston job. Last year, Houston had a really, really good season, kind of quietly because nobody really knew what to expect. Got a returning starting quarterback in Connor Wegman, who's good. He's not a great thrower, good runner, but Willie Fritz's teams have been really good on defense. So I think that's a good spot for Houston as well. So 4 teams in the way too early CBS Sports preseason top 25. Texas Tech at 7, BYU at 12, Utah at number 18. Good spot for the Utes. And the Houston Cougars at number 21. We'll review as we find them, as people kind of publish them, more of these way too early top 25s. But I don't think that's a bad spot, and I think that's pretty good respect for both the Utah program and Morgan Scalley and the talent that he's got on this roster to have him in at number 18. All right, let's get on to position groups. We're going to spotlight different position groups all spring long as spring football begins and into the offseason. And the position group we're going to spotlight today for Utah football is the wideout group. For those of you that have been Utah football fans for a long time, this has been a group that's been pretty deficient over the years. Utah has not had a 1,000-yard wide receiver since Drez Anderson did it in 2014. Think about that for just a minute. They haven't had a 1,000-yard receiver in almost 12 seasons. That shows you that room has been somewhat deficient, but they also haven't put a big emphasis on the throw game. I think that's going to change this year. I'm not saying that Utah necessarily has a 1,000-yard wide receiver. I want to see how Kevin McGivern kind of divvies some of that stuff out. But Kevin McGivern, he nearly had a 1,000-yard receiver last year, and he brought him with him from Utah State. That's the first guy we highlight, Braden Pagan, the Utah State transfer who will join this Utah wide receiver room, in all likelihood, is probably the number one wide receiver. He's a 6'3", 210-pound senior. He had 60 catches and 926 yards and 5 touchdowns a year ago at Utah State. At a Utah State team that, frankly, was not very talented up front. Bryson Barnes had a really good year, but he was running for his life much of the time. I think Pagan's got a chance to be a 1,000-yard wide receiver this year for the University of Utah. That's a major upgrade. They have a wide receiver 1. They probably also have a definitive wide receiver 2 as well on this roster now. His name's Kyrie Scholes. He comes to Utah from San Jose State. He's a transfer. He's 6 foot. He's a buck 85. He had 59 catches, 768 yards, and 2 touchdowns last year. He was the number 2 wide receiver at San Jose State. So he was the number 2 wide receiver and still had almost 800 yards receiving. That's usually what Utah's number 1 wide receiver has. This kid's good. This was a guy that Kevin McGivern also helped recruit to San Jose State when he was there 2 years ago. He is probably your definitive number 2 wide receiver, though I will say Utah does have a guy on the roster that could be that guy as well coming back. He's one of the known commodities, Larry Simmons. Larry only had 15 catches last year, but he had 280 yards and 6 touchdowns. He really wasn't a target at all early in the season. But as the season went along, he began to develop a little bit of a kind of a relationship with Devin Dampier and really finished the season strong. I like Larry Simmons. I don't know if he's the number 3 guy or the number 2 guy, but I know that he'll be a big part of it coming back this year. Another guy that emerged late last year for Utah, and I think he'll be in the mix this year too, and he might assume that role that Ryan Davis played a year ago as that slot wide receiver. I thought he would play a bigger role early in the year. He didn't, but late in the year he did, especially when Davis got hurt. That's Creed Whittemore. Whittemore was a transfer from Mississippi State. He had 12 catches for 92 yards and a touchdown, but most of those came in the last couple of games of the year when Ryan Davis was a bit banged up. So those are 2 known commodities coming back to go with the 2 incoming guys in Pagan and Scholes, who are very much known commodities because of their production at Utah State and at San Jose State in the Mountain West. So those are 4 wide receivers right there. I think if those are your top 4 wide receivers, you're in really good shape if you're Utah. Because, again, you'll have tight ends and backs you're throwing to as well. But that's a really good top 4. Now, there's a few unknown commodities in the Utah wide receiver room as well. Number 1 was a guy that we thought last year coming into the year was going to be a big part of the pass game, but he never played because he was hurt all year. He got a terrible case of turf toe last fall. Dadrian Zipperer. Do you remember Dadrian from 2 years ago? Again, he was only a freshman. He came in. Didn't really play a big role till the end of the year, and that was, of course, when the quarterback situation was out of control for Utah. Everybody was beat up. Everybody was hurt. But Zipperer finished up the 2024 season with 8 catches, 122 yards. I really thought that he would be one of the top 3 wide receivers coming into the year last year, and again, it just never came to fruition because of the injury. Assuming he's healthy, he's a guy that I think could be part of the pass game. But again, I list him as what's known as an unknown commodity. Another guy that I'm listing as an unknown commodity is Tobias Merriweather. Tobias was another one of those guys that came into the season last year with pretty high hopes. He checked those boxes. 6'5", 195, 200 pounds. He had shown glimpses at both Cal and at Notre Dame. It just never really came to fruition last year with Tobias Merriweather either. He played in 7 games. He battled some injuries. He had 7 catches for 105 yards. I have no idea what the plans are for Merriweather moving forward, but I think he could be, again, a guy because, again, he has the measurables. He has all of that there. Can he bring it all together? We'll see. It'll be his last go-around in college. And then one other unknown commodity in that wide receiver room right now for Utah is Ricky Johnson. Ricky Johnson comes as a freshman, maybe even a redshirt freshman this year to the University of Utah. I'm not sure the number of snaps that he played last year at Mississippi State, but he comes with new old wide receivers coach Chad Bumphus. Chad coached him and recruited him to Mississippi State last year. And he was a guy that coming out of high school was pretty heralded in the South. He only had 3 catches and 17 yards a year ago, but that Mississippi State wide receiver room was pretty crowded. So I'll list him as an unknown commodity as well in this Utah wide receiver room. And that's what's going to be interesting about spring football. There's not a lot that you can tell about spring football, but there's certain position groups that you can get a feel for what guys look like as they work out with quarterbacks, and that wide receiver spot's one of those spots. So it'll be interesting to see Because Devin Dampier already has a relationship with Simmons and Whittemore because he threw to those guys last year. And my guess is he probably has a little bit of one with Dadrian Zipper or two, and maybe a little bit with Tobias Merriweather. It'll be interesting to see how he develops with Braden Pagan and with Kyrie Scholes and with Ricky Johnson. So those are the guys that I'm keeping my eye on. That's 7 wide receivers. And that's really about what you carry. Most of the time, they carry about 6 on the active roster for wide receivers. But Pagan and Scholes clearly come in with very good resumes from a year ago. Simmons and Whittemore, they were in the program and they contributed last year. And then the unknown commodities, Zipper, Merriweather, and Johnson, we'll see how those play out for the University of Utah this spring. And I'm anxious to see a lot of that stuff. But the wide receiver group is going to be really interesting because, again, it has not been a major emphasis over the years. It's not been a room that had a lot of dudes in it. Now, we've seen some guys that had solid careers at Utah go on to be really good pros. Tim Patrick's been in the league now for 7 or 8 years. And when Tim's been healthy, whether with the Broncos or with the Jaguars or with the Lions, he's been good. Tim's big issue has been staying healthy, but he's been productive. Obviously, we're seeing a guy like Devon Vele, who's gone on, and he's having a really nice career as well. So there are some of those guys that have been out there. They just didn't necessarily pop when they were here. I'm going to be interested to see with Kevin McGivern's offense, with Chad Bumpus back in the room again, with Morgan Scalley kind of evolving the offense just a little bit, if we don't see some wide receivers and a little bit more wide receiver talent begin to trickle into Utah football over the next couple of years as we begin the Morgan Scalley era. So anyway, that's my position group look for this week. If you guys have any feedback, anything, any thoughts that you might have, any questions you might have, feel free to share them. briley@huntsman.utah.edu. That's briley@huntsman.utah.edu. Our special guest, Wes Wilcox, coming up. Utah basketball general manager will be joining us. But the Runnin' Utes are heading down the home stretch. I know the results aren't there, but I will say this as somebody that calls every single game. The effort has gotten better and better and better. They've held 5 of their last 6 opponents under their season average. That's pretty good. Their best efforts on the defensive end of the season came at Cincinnati, where they held Cincinnati to 69 points, but they probably should have won that game up 5 with 1:30 to play. But they turned right back around a couple of days later and win at West Virginia against a team that's really good defensively. They held West Virginia way under their season average as well. The stretch run, final 3 games coming up are all very winnable for Utah. At Arizona State on Saturday, at Colorado, at Salt Lake City at the Huntsman Center on senior night, next Tuesday, and then they finish up the regular season at Baylor March 7th. These are all winnable games. There's been, to be fair, and Alex has told me this too, there's probably been in the Big 12 season 3 to 4 games that Utah not only could have, but maybe should have won, just didn't quite make enough plays down the stretch. So right now you're trying to finish the season on a high note. You're trying to finish the season with a little momentum, with a little wind at your back. And really what they're trying to figure out right now is who are the building blocks for next year. You don't want to have to bring 12 or 13 new faces in. Who are ideally the 3 or 4 guys from this year's team that you would love to return for the foundation? Who are those guys you can build around? Who are those guys that know exactly what Alex and his staff are looking for philosophically and how they want to play? Because the reality is today in college basketball, nobody, very rarely, if anywhere, brings back an entire roster. You graduate seniors, guys hit the portal. That's just how it is. But if you can bring 3 or 4 guys back, especially after a first year in a program, and build around those guys and then fill in with good talent around it, then you're in a pretty good situation. So that's really where they're at. We'll talk about that coming up next with Wes Wilcox, Utah basketball general manager, and get his thoughts on year 1 and how he goes about what his day-to-day looks like. We had Joe DeRazio, the football GM, on the pod a couple of weeks ago. Now we'll talk to Wes. He's almost a full year in on the job. We'll talk to him a little bit about the job, his transition from the NBA to college, and what the plan is moving forward for roster building. We'll do that coming up. Wes Wilcox next, here on the Crimson Corner.
Here's another insider interview on the Crimson Corner podcast.
All right, next up on the Crimson Corner podcast today, it's going to be fun to talk to our next guest. He's the general manager of Utah men's basketball. He's been on the job now. Boy, it's been about 10 months. I think that's about right now. Is that right, Wes Wilcox? About 10 months?
I think that's right. You lose track of time, but we started sometime in April, so whatever that math is.
So let's start there. What have the last 10 months been like, you transitioning from pretty much a career in pro basketball in the NBA to this new world of college basketball?
It's been, wild. I can't believe it's 10 months, how quickly it goes. But, you get settled, you move, you sell a house, you buy a house. You try to figure out like all the normal functions of a new job. So many of us have done this. And then, you're trying to learn the landscape of college basketball. I certainly know the college basketball game quite well, but never from this position. And but doing it with great friends and people that you have the highest level of respect for makes it a lot of fun.
So what was it about the job? And obviously there's a relationship with the head coach, and we'll get into that in a minute. But what was it about the job that appealed to you after spending so long in the NBA and deciding to kind of make that pivot?
Yeah, there's so many things, and not to go on like forever, but first of all, knowing Alex very well, being extremely close, like both personal and professional friends with him. Two, the history of the University of Utah men's basketball program. I know and recognize what this place has been and what it can, and we're confident in what it will be. So those are two, critical areas. A third being Salt Lake City's an amazing community. It's embraced my family. My family was super excited to join the community. So I think, Salt Lake being an amazing city, especially when you consider that against the Big 12 conference. And then probably the fourth thing is, there's a lot of like newness in the world of college sports right now. We all know it's changing rapidly with NIL and how teams are being constructed, but really it's a new frontier, and it's an opportunity to learn something, be on the very beginnings of a change that's going to be lasting. And that's pretty exciting.
Yeah. I want to get into that as we go here, because your background in the NBA and pro basketball and your skill set is, I think, something that's very much needed in today's world of college basketball. But let's go to your basketball journey. I know it because you and I have had a lot of conversations in your 10 months here, but I don't know if a lot of our audience knows kind of your basketball journey and where it kind of began. So let's just take a quick walk down memory lane. Yeah. You're a California guy growing up in Southern California. What's your basketball journey, Wes?
Yeah, for some reason, as like a 10-year-old, I wanted to be a basketball coach, and my entire life really has been dedicated to trying to learn the game from a very early age. And, I bounce around college trying to meet people. My family didn't know anybody in the game of basketball, college, pro, nothing. And through college, I was fortunate enough to bump into people who told me if you want to get started in the game, it really starts at college basketball camps. And that's what led me to the University of Utah, because that was the height of the Majerus era. And I worked camps all over the Western United States, the biggest: UCLA, the pump camps, Stanford, Utah, the teams that were rolling in that era. And so Utah was the number one camp, because we all have the Majerus camp memories of Majerus would teach and coach his, the Utah Utes players during camp. And those clinics that we called them were maybe one of the best learning environments for a young coach that you could find. And so I loved coming to the Utah camps and working the Utah camps. That's where I first met Al. Al doesn't remember me, of course, because he's super college famous celebrity player. But that's where it all started. And that was my first introduction to the University of Utah in the late 90s, early 2000s. And so from there, I was fortunate. I wanted to be a college coach, but that led to a camp connection actually led to an internship with the Miami Heat in the video room in the NBA. I was fortunate enough to be offered and accepted that job. And really that launched a pro career. And my first 7 or 8 years were on the coaching side, video, player development, assistant coach. And then I got opportunities to move into the front office. And I didn't really want to be a front office guy, but eventually you realize leadership dictates opportunity. I kept getting front office opportunity. I made the shift. And, a couple of years into that, I had the opportunity to run a D-League team at the time, which is now the NBA G League. And that's where I was fortunate to circle back to Alex and hire him in 2011 as our first head coach at Canton. And then from there, I've had a bunch of other NBA jobs. But really, it all goes back to a young kid wanting to get in basketball, trying to figure out how to do it. And the University of Utah and Rick Majerus basketball camps were instrumental in that. That's where I met Al. And so this is kind of a full circle opportunity.
All right, let's ask the real important question now. How good a player were you?
Not good. Not very good. I was a good high school player. I went to go play at like a small Division III. I didn't end up playing. I played 1 year of golf there though. I joke. I was probably the worst college golfer of all time. It must have been like a no-cut sport at a Division III, but I had a ton of fun doing it. And really what it all goes back to was I was a good high school player, probably was like a Division III level player, but I knew very quickly that I wanted to coach or I wanted to work in the game. And I was so focused. That's what I moved into as quickly as I could. And, it's really been an amazing basketball journey where I'm super grateful and fortunate to have worked for a lot of great people and in the game a long time.
Was there a moment, I know you mentioned Miami, but was there a moment where you're like the pivot went from coaching to front office? I mean, was there okay, this is a kind of a light bulb on moment for you that said, maybe it's not going to be coaching?
Yeah. So I started in Miami's video room and then I went to the New Orleans. That was the Hornets at the time. They had just moved from Charlotte to New Orleans. I was in the video room there. And then I went to Cleveland in 2003. That was when LeBron was first drafted in Cleveland, and I was fortunate to be in Cleveland for 9 years. And my transition really happened in Cleveland. I just over the course of one season, I had like 3 or 4 people like present like front office opportunities, and I actually turned down the first couple because I wanted to be a coach. But then eventually you realize, like I said earlier, leadership dictates opportunity. You got to listen to leadership. And that's when I made the transition into the front office. And it was actually a pretty amazing time to make the move because the NBA D League was just exploding. And this was now is what the NBA G League, and the league was like 6 or 8 teams. And so very quickly I got to get on the ground, like the ground floor of that league. And then we started a team in Erie. I started a team in Canton. And so really like very early on, I got to team building and evaluating for team building, even though I had an NBA job. I scouted and eventually, was fortunate to like become a director. But those jobs were evaluating for an NBA team are very different than evaluating and actually picking players and managing a roster and managing a staff with your D League team. So I was just like really fortunate to get a ton of opportunity of both evaluating team building, which certainly was the right move for my skill set, looking back at it all.
So everybody knows, or most people probably listening to this podcast know you and Alex connected in the D League. You hired him to be the head coach of the Canton Charge. We've got that part of the story. Why do you think you guys hit it off? Why do you think you guys have remained friends through the year? Yeah. There's got to be something, because this is a friendship that's spanned 15 years, and it's different than just being work colleagues because you've stayed in touch. And he wanted to bring you on board. So what's the click? What's the connection between you two?
Yeah, really good question, Bill. And I don't know that I've been asked that before, but I think we have. First of all, we have like the exact same or very, very similar basketball values. So the things that Al values, independent of his education in basketball and his his mentorship and teaching and style of play, are the same things that I value in both players and teams and environment and culture and staff. So I would say In the worlds in which we became friends, our basketball philosophies could not align more closely. I've said to many people, I may have said this to you, like on a different time, like I'm very, and this is, we would never do it this way because that goes to another part of the question. But Al could never see the team show up 6 or 8 months later, and if we have the time, he's going to like the character. He's going to like the makeup of the substance of the group. Eventually, we will get there, okay, to where and now getting to do that with Al makes it even more fun, because he's obviously an active participant in the whole thing. But I use that example to say, like, there is no disagreement on the type of program or the type of player that we're going to eventually collect over, like, and consistently acquire, retain, and develop. And that player is the player that all of you know way better than I. The player that Alex Jensen was, the tough, smart, unselfish, team first guy. That's the way we're ultimately going to be built. So one, Bill, I would say from a basketball standpoint, we're like very, very similar in our approach. And then, like, from the personal relationship standpoint, it's anybody that knows Al, he's just an amazing person. Like, he's one of the most authentic and genuine people you'll meet. And he's also, like, very, very honest in a way that for those who get to know him well, he's so nice and easygoing and and easy to relate to. And then you get behind the scenes, and he is the most, like, ruthless competitor, most honest individual you'll ever meet. And we share that. So, like, we argue, like, we get into it, but it comes from, like, such a authentic place of integrity that, like, it's like really comfortable knowing that you can get into an argument with somebody because you disagree on something, but it's not disagreeable. And even if it gets, like, combative at times, or maybe confrontational is a better word, like, it's coming from only trying to help the group and help each other.
It's a good way to put it right there. And yeah, I've gotten to know Alex. I only knew him from a distance. And over the last 10 months, I've gotten to know him a little bit better because when he was here, I wasn't quite in Salt Lake City yet. And it's been interesting to see. Everybody sees this very stoic, quiet demeanor. But then you stand next to him on the sideline where our broadcast position is. It ain't that. And then when you sit with him behind the scenes and have real talks, you see that competitor and that fire really come out.
For sure. That's it. He's one of the most competitive people I've ever met. He's also one of the most humble people and one of the most intelligent people I've ever met. Like, his intellect, and then he just has, like, incredible integrity. And really, Bill, I would say it this way: like, I feel incredibly fortunate to have our random paths collide 25 years ago, and like, the way what he does for my kids and the way he treats, and he always has, is, like, super special. And that's where it's really neat, because it's not just me, Bill. There's like 7 or 8 of us that work here in the office that basically are here because of Al, and all of us share the same, I would say, the same sentiment. And we are incredibly motivated to get this thing right and to return this program back to what it was. Not just because of the professional integrity we all take to the job, or because of the personal pride that we all take to the job, or because of the responsibility we have for the university, the fans, for the players. But yeah, there's a personal element to us for us. We want it, part of us, and this is not the only, but by any means the only reason, but it's an important reason. I want this to work for Al. I want the basketball world to see how amazing he is as both a person and a coach, and we're going to get it there.
All right. With that said, we're almost done with year one. We're not quite there yet. 10 months in, as we've said. Yeah. What have you found to be the biggest challenge in year one in your position as GM?
Yeah, I mean, managing injuries for us has been the biggest challenge this year. I mean, the Bubakar Faye injury, not having Bubakar for the entire of the season. Bubakar's an amazing person, very important player to us. And we certainly live and we function in the world where no excuses. We got to go out there and do it every night with the guys that we have and next man up. But the reality is Baba was an important part of our plan, and not to have him this year was a huge challenge. It also made us play smaller. Everybody looks at the team and they're like, man, where's the size? Well, some of the size is unfortunately not playing for us. And really, I want to just highlight the incredible human that Baba is, and he's been an incredible teammate. And like having him in practice every day makes us better. And so, but yeah, missing him on the court. Jacob Patrick hasn't played since December. Whether or not he's going to come back is an unknown. I say we have to be prepared to not have Jacob or come back. So, and then, we add Lucas midseason, and there's another one that happens. And we're fortunate that Lucas is doing good, and we expect Lucas to be back here soon. So injuries, overcoming injuries is a big thing. The second thing I would say that jumps out with is the quality of the Big 12. Yeah. It is, but on the other hand, that creates one of the incredible opportunities here at the University of Utah. It's the best conference in college basketball. We see it every night, but the opportunity to play against 4 top 5 teams, when I'm going out and talking to agents and families and kids about coming to the University of Utah, the history, our coach, and the opportunity to play in the Big 12 are incredibly motivating factors. And that's why I'm confident we're going to be able to get this place back to what, the fans, the city, the university deserves.
I think people ask me this a lot, but you're the perfect person to ask it to. Do you guys have, as a staff, you personally, but it's a staff deal, do you have a formula or a philosophy that you guys kind of have in mind, or maybe it's on paper in roster building? Because there's so many ways to build a roster today. In the old days, when you and I were coming up, there were high schools, there were junior colleges. Yeah. Transfers were rare, especially within a conference. But now you've got the high school path, you've got the JC path. Obviously, we know what the portal is, but now the international road is way open. There, you'd have a handful of international players, maybe in college, but now it feels like every team's got 2 or 3. You guys are part of that too. So what would you say is right now the Utah basketball roster building or philosophy for building a roster?
Yeah, well, one, I would say it starts with like very clearly identifying the values of the program and then evaluating to those values. And we can share those very clearly. We know, one, you got to love the game. What does that mean? You got to watch it. You got to be a worker. You got to be passionate about the game. 2, you got to compete, play hard, play physical, play through fatigue. 3, you got to be smart, good decision maker, right? Good time score awareness. 4, you gotta be skilled, pass, dribble, shoot. And then 5, we want you to be a good teammate. So like it starts with the people. It starts with understanding those values. And then as we've learned, you mentioned all those different team building paths. I would say getting back to the state of Utah is really important to us. We have to have a significant connection to the local player. It's very, very important, as we've learned. Like, there are good players in Utah high school basketball. That is important for us. We have to make a meaningful connection in there. And that is a huge advantage for Al, one of the best players out of the state, clearly one of the most storied careers. And so we got to recruit the state of Utah. And then secondly, or third, Bill, I would say the international market is really important to us, especially in this era. We got to know international players. Now, we're super fortunate here. We have 2 incredible resources in Martin Schiller, one of our assistant coaches, who's very close with Al. He worked at the German national team with Al back in 2015. That's another interesting story. That all came together because we drafted Dennis Schroeder in Atlanta in 2013, and it's crazy that connection came out of that draft pick. But anyways, so international, Martin Schiller plays a huge role. Martin's been a head coach in the EuroLeague. He's been a head coach in First Division Germany. He's coached over there for many years. And then everybody knows Kim Tilley, who Al hired on the staff. He's been an amazing resource for us. Kim played 14 or 15 years at the highest level, overseas, ACB to EuroLeague. And so we have to tap into the international market. And then, of course, we got to be prepared for the portal.
Yep. By the way, I'm old enough to have called Kim's games, so that's how long I've been here. He was fantastic. Walk us through and this is probably where your background comes in, because when you're working in the front office in the NBA, you're looking everywhere, worldwide, everywhere you can find talent. But what's the process? because that's what your job is day in and day out, is roster, looking at the future, looking at now. How do you go about finding the talent, but then evaluating the talent? What's that recruiting process look like? I don't even know if recruiting, Wes, is the right word to use anymore.
Exactly. Well, it's interesting. Like one of the reasons why international is so important is the way we look at it is we kind of think like international right now is basically the portal. You're talking about 20, 21, 22, 23-year-olds that you can go engage with that community because they're not in college. So that's part of the reason why the international market's so important. I was just overseas for, I don't even know. The guys joke with me. I say I was overseas for 3 weeks. They told me in reality it was 11 days. I really thought it was 3 weeks. But no, the international market is really important because we can do it now. So that's one part. How it all comes to you, it's really, Bill, it's like a weird question because when I took the job, Al and I were talking about this, or before I took the job, I was like, Al, how are we going to do this? There's like 2,000 college players. There's like the whole world that's going to want to now play in college because of the NIL stuff. And Al said, he's like, look, Wes, if we do it right, they're going to come to us. And, Bill, I would say like, I just think I'm a basketball guy, right? That's it. I've spent my life in the game. But you know what I've realized is what comes with that is like a network. You have 25 years worth of connection across the globe in the world of basketball. And then you add in Martin, you add in Kim, you add in Chill, you add in Eric, and all of a sudden there's a lot of this that naturally happens. You get a lead on a player, you have a conversation with a friend that leads to a conversation with an agent. So I would say naturally it happens. But then the other part I would just share briefly is like, we are very organized in our portal prep. Okay. We are running a pro personnel scouting process like we've done the pros for many years. There's 32 conferences. There's Division II, JUCO, NAIA, International. We have 9 staff members. Everybody manages conferences. We have biweekly meetings. We just came out of a 4-hour portal prep meeting. We're tiering players. We're valuing players. We're studying players. Like it's the normal pro personnel scouting process. Just to be prepared for when that portal opens. Our hope is that we have 20 to 25 guys as targets at each position at minimum that we have studied. We know we know the player through like video evaluation. We've set values based upon a bunch of different metrics. We've met with our analytics guy today, who's putting together like one of the most robust analytic systems in college basketball. And so like, we're just working very hard to be prepared for when that portal opens, because we know that's another important part of it.
You may have just answered the question without knowing it, but I'm guessing you have to feel better positioned heading into this coming off season than you guys were last off season. One, you got a little bit of a late start because, as you said, preparation, everybody was preparing in January, February, March. You guys didn't get on board till April. So how much better position do you feel like you are to attack this coming off season?
Yeah, I mean, so much better. Like at the end of the day, you got to deliver. We get that. So we got to get to the portal and we got to build a team and we got to win in a way that, this community feels good about. But I feel much, much better in our organization, our preparation. I mean, I don't know that people know, but I was living in Sacramento. Chill was living on the East Coast. Al was living in Dallas. We'd fly in 3 or 4 days. We'd work remote like crazy to try to put a team together. Very challenging circumstances. The portal was basically open when we got here. And so, yeah, I feel much better. Put it this way, Bill, we're working at it every single day. It is tireless, and especially for our coaches, because they also have to coach the team, coach practice, and do game prep. And all of them have, responsibilities to try to get us to a good spot. So we feel much, much further ahead than than what we felt last year. But at the end of the day, we know we got to deliver.
Well, I could talk to you for an hour or 2 or 3, and luckily I get to see you so we can. But one more question, just based on what you've seen this year from the Big 12, what's the biggest key as you've looked at how other teams have built, the good teams in this league have built their rosters?
Yeah.
Is there a common denominator? Is there something that you've seen that said, yeah, this is what we have to be able to compete in the Big 12 moving forward?
Yes. I would say one of the, and Al and I talk about this with Chill and Martin and Eric and the rest of the staff all the time, but Al and I constantly talk about this. I would say one of the biggest lessons is the best teams you're playing against NBA players. Okay. We get that. The majority of the league, it's not actually as big as you would expect. Okay. It's 6'8" is big enough, but and you can have a 6-foot guard, but what you have to have is a body, right? It is a big physical league. So I would say like the physical development of the league is, I would think, one important piece. And then I would say the competitiveness of the league, the physicality of the league is at such an elite level. It just reinforces the things that we value. If we go build a team that represents who Alex Jensen was as a player with the bodies to compete in the league, we're gonna be a good program. And I would say more and more, we don't have to chase the 5-star. We don't have to chase the 4-star. That's not what we're trying to do. If we can get in the game and we like the player, certainly we'll go do that. But no, the way you're going to win in this league, and Al and I believe this to our cores, if you are competitive or you play with a physicality and a mental toughness and a physical toughness, if you are smart, if you make good basketball decisions, if you have good game awareness, if you have some skill, pass, dribble, shoot, if you're a great teammate, you're doing it like with your teammate, for your teammate, you care about the group over the individual with like the physicality, like the body, the physical build, we're going to win in this league. And I would say now that is probably the most like prevailing thought, which gives me confidence every night. Basically, we need to find 4 versions of Alex Jensen, put them on the court, and we're going to win.
Easier said than done, though. You probably want the 21-year-old version of Alex Jensen.
Oh.
I think Al could probably give you a run or two up and down the floor, but you probably want 21-year-old Alex Jensen.
It's funny, for sure. I definitely don't want the 49-year-old version. But there's actually been 3 or 4 days where Al has gotten on the court and practiced because of like we've lost players due to injury and we're like short body. And I must say I'm still pretty impressed that Al's able to get out there and do it. Like it's his mind and his skill is still pretty impressive. But yes, please, a much younger version of the current Al. Al's where he needs to be on the sidelines. Yeah.
Hey, thanks for doing this, Wes. This was a blast. I'm going to let you get back at it and continue to construct the roster moving forward. And we'll catch up again soon. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill.
The best insight on all things Utah athletics. It's the Crimson Corner Podcast.
Big thank you to Wes Wilcox, Utah basketball GM, for coming by and talking some hoop. I just, talking to Wes, talking to Alex on a very regular basis, that staff, the improvements haven't been as large, I think, as some fans want. But if you're around it every game, every day like I am, you see it. And I know what Alex wants to do, and I know what his staff want to do and they want to accomplish. And I feel really good about the direction they're going. Year one's obviously not been where they wanted it to be, but I really feel confident you can see major improvements coming up in Utah basketball heading to year number 2. All right, let's get to a couple of reader emails and a quick note on baseball opening day for Utah baseball coming up. As I said, I always love to get feedback from you guys on the pod, whether it's a question or a comment or a thought or whatever it might happen to be. So feel free to hit me up, briley@huntsman.utah.edu. That's briley@huntsman.utah.edu. Leslie Rollins says, hey, Bill, happy you're doing this podcast. I miss listening to you every day on ESPN 700, and I would love it if you could get Britton Covey on. I will do that, Leslie. Britton is a good friend, and he was busy. He was back with the Philadelphia Eagles this year. But I will do my best sometime this spring or early summer to try to get Britton on the show and catch up with him and see how life's treating him, because he's truly one of the good guys. And thank you for listening. And thanks for saying that. I love doing that radio show I did. It was my life for 30 years and for 20 years every day on ESPN 700. And I love doing guest spots with Sean O'Connell and with Spence Checketts on their shows. But I love being able to do this every week, too. This kind of fills that void just a little bit, sitting down with Nick and doing this podcast every week. So I'm glad you enjoy it, and thanks for chiming in with us. Jared Woodward. Oh, Jared. Jared sent me a long one today. Jared said, hey, Bill, growing up going to Rice-Eccles Stadium is some of my favorite memories. I've been listening to you for pretty much the entire time you've been a Utah broadcaster. I actually remember listening to Bill Marcroft and not sure about the next broadcaster, but you have absolutely lived up to his legacy. You are truly the voice of the Utes, so thank you for your years of entertainment and dedication to your craft and to the University of Utah. I truly appreciate the work that you've done. Well, Jared, thank you for that, and I do too. Billy Marcroft was an absolute legend, and so for you as a longtime Utah fan to put me in that same category is truly an honor. And this job, what I get to do, whether it's this podcast or Utah football or Utah basketball or soccer or baseball or softball on ESPN+, to be the voice of the Utes is truly a job of a lifetime and a dream job for me. And I absolutely, positively love it. And thank you for your kind comments and for listening for down through the years. Now he says, to your topic a week ago, my top 5 Utah quarterbacks are very similar to yours. Number 5, Scott Mitchell. Number 4, Tyler Huntley. Number 3, Brian Johnson. Number 2, Alex Smith. And number 1, Cam Rising. If you guys missed the podcast last week, since we had Brian Johnson as our guest last week of the podcast, I did my top 5 Utah quarterbacks. I had Tyler 5, Scott 4, Brian 3, Alex 2, and Cam Rising number 1. Jared says Cam had more it to him than Alex. Nothing against Alex. Cam just had something different about him that was just so impressive. Tyler has an edge for me over Scott because of how impressive he was comparatively from what came before. Jordan Wynn, Travis Wilson, Terrence Kane, John Hayes, Troy Williams. Tyler was just slightly a cut above. Again, nothing against those players, but it's not hard to see the difference. I think it'd be interesting, a thought experiment for the top 5 greatest Utes of all time. However, my knowledge of Utah football before the 90s is very small. My 90s knowledge is mostly from perspective as a child. So let's go with the top 5 Utes of the 21st century. All right. We'll do that next week. We'll throw that in the pod for you, Jared, next week. And if you guys out there want to give me your top 5 Utes of the 21st century in football, feel free to do that. Again, B. Riley at huntsman.utah.edu. One quick note on baseball. Utah baseball's already up and playing. They've been pretty much living in California for the last couple of weeks. Gary Henderson's team's up, and they've started the season well. They'll be back there this week before coming home March the 6th. That is opening day for the brand new baseball stadium on campus, Charlie Montford Field at America First Ballpark. They'll open up with a weekend series against Grand Canyon. So if you haven't seen it, you can go online to UtahUtes.com and all the social media channels for Utah baseball and see pictures. It's absolutely gorgeous. But I would suggest grabbing some tickets for opening day or even that opening weekend against Grand Canyon. We have no idea what Mother Nature is going to give us that week. We live in Utah. It could be, as our winter has been, 55 and sunny. But Mother Nature might bring us back to reality too. Either way, grab your tickets. They're not super expensive. And go check out this beautiful new ballpark and a good Utah baseball team this year. UtahTickets.com. That's UtahTickets.com. They have season tickets there, but you can buy single gamers as well for the brand new baseball stadium that opens up for baseball opening day on March the 6th. And I will have the calls of Utah baseball this year on ESPN Plus, including opening day against Grand Canyon. So that will do it for this week's edition of the Crimson Corner. A big thank you to Wes Wilcox, Utah basketball GM, for coming on with us. Of course, my guy and executive producer, Nick Bowlerjack, for making sure this thing gets out and sounds right when it gets to you guys. And thanks to you guys as well. If you don't mind, do us a solid. Write us up a nice review. Rate us well wherever you get your podcast. and we appreciate that a lot. 5 stars, 4 stars, thumbs up, good review. Share it with your friends as well, whether they're Utah fans or not. And don't ever be afraid to shoot me a note, briley@huntsman.utah.edu. That will do it for this week's edition of the Crimson Corner. Till next time, I'm Bill Riley, saying go Utes.
You've been listening to the Crimson Corner podcast with Bill Riley. Bill is back next week with the latest on Utes. Download previous Crimson Corner episodes on all major podcast platforms.